A little bit different this week. If you've been with us, right, we've been working our way through the Gospel of Matthew. We've been working over the last couple of months through chapters 8 and 9. Jesus, our healer, was the title of the sermon series that ended last week. So if you missed any of that, you can find it if you go out on our YouTube page, right? They're all loaded up out on YouTube. If you go on our website, you can find any messages you might have missed on the website. And you can also go into the church app. They're in there as well. You'll see a sermon title in there, and the app actually has the outlines for you as well. I don't know if you knew that. So if you click on the sermon and you open it up, it'll have the outline in there for you as well, all kind of preloaded for you. So next week, we'll have our Christmas program for kids, like I talked about, December 17th. We'll begin our Christmas kind of short sermon series, which will end on Christmas Eve, and then as we move into 2024, a new sermon series. I'm trying to decide if I want to do just a short series of standalone messages, maybe just kind of addressing some of the things going on in our world. I haven't decided on that yet. Either way, we will eventually make it to Matthew chapter 10, right, where Jesus begins to take his followers and send them out. Right? He's taught them, right? He showed them what he's going to do, and now he says it's time for you guys to go do this. And I think there's a very powerful message in there for us. It's not just about coming here and listening to what Jesus has to say and hearing about what Jesus does, but it's in taking that and going out there, right? Jesus sends his people out. Okay, so now today is a little bit different. You notice I've got the handheld mic because I'm not going to be up here that long. Gallup Hill, you guys are aware, is going through the process of selecting new elders. And so here's what I'm going to do. We're actually going to introduce the two of them, though you know them. They've both been around for a long time. They're going to have a chance to come up and share a little bit with you. But I'm going to spend like the first 5 minutes here just remind you, here's what elders are, here's what they do, and introduce the two candidates. And they're going to come up, and each is going to share their testimony, right, their story of like their spiritual walk from when they were saved and before that up until now, and then a bit more. But just by way of reminder, right, elder, right, is really another name for pastor. Elders are pastors. They are spiritual leaders of the church. Their responsibilities include prayer, right? It's the elders' responsibilities to pray. It's everybody's responsibility to pray for the congregation, but it's specifically called out for pastors and teachers and elders. They are the primary ones that are responsible for preaching and teaching, right? From the pulpit and from some other areas. So your elders are those that preach and teach primarily to the congregation. They are responsible for vision and leadership, like where's the church going? How do we serve this community, right? What are the different ways that Gallup Hill can minister to its people and reach out to the community as well? They are responsible for church discipline, right? And we hope that there are not instances where we have to go through that process, but they do come up. They are responsible for that and for spiritual care of the church. They are the shepherds that look over the congregation and watch over us. And we see these things modeled in the New Testament. First, you see it done by the apostles. Then later, as Paul begins to travel through all the churches he plants, right, he starts appointing elders. They are selected and then put into place. So there's numerous passages where Paul talks about that. But I want to reinforce this morning, right, what are the qualifications for elder? As these two men come up, I'm going to read a passage out of 1 Timothy chapter 3. It'll be up on the screen if you want to turn. You can. It's towards the end of your Bible. 1 Timothy chapter 3. And I love the ESV version, which is what I preach out of, but the ESV often translates the same word for sometimes it'll translate it pastor, sometimes it'll translate it elder, sometimes it'll translate it overseer. And I'm like, pick a word, man. Like, this gets confusing. Like, okay, but when you see qualifications for overseers, which is what it says in my Bible, that is talking about elders. It's talking about pastors. So I'm going to read that, and we'll talk very briefly about it. Paul says, as he's writing to Timothy, this saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer or elder, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he might not fall into disgrace, into a snare from the devil. The qualifications you see there are very similar to deacon, with one key difference, right? Elders are able to teach. They must be skilled teachers. They must be qualified spiritually, right? It goes through all these different qualifications here. So we, as your elders that are already in place at Gallup Hill Baptist Church, have evaluated and looked at these two men and say, we think they meet these qualifications. It's now your turn to get involved in this process, right? You currently have two elders. There's one staff elder, myself. That means I'm kind of on staff. I get paid. This is what I do for my living. You have one, what we call lay elder, which is he has another job outside of this and is full-time employed. That's Mr. James Anderson. These two men are to be evaluated as lay elders, and if confirmed, they will serve GHBC in that role. So you'll have 4 total elders at that point. The bylaws currently say that elders are elected to serve a term of 3 years. They have to be voted on by the membership and confirmed with a vote of 80%, right? That's a high threshold, and that's because these men, you don't want to get this wrong, right? So here's how you get involved. You have 2 parts. First, for everyone, regardless of whether you're a member or a tender, right, we evaluate. Your job is to listen, to watch, to see, to ask questions, and evaluate these men. There's information packets on the side tables. We want to get all the information we can to you guys. You can read about their involvement in the church. You can talk to them about their involvement in the church. You listen to their testimonies. You can see a summary of their theological beliefs. We told them to keep it to the core, right? I don't really care what your view of the end times is, right? But what your view of salvation is, yes, we need to know that, right? You can ask questions of them. If you have concerns, you can bring them to James or I. You can bring them to them, any kind of clarifications or anything like that. The process has been ongoing. It will continue up until January 20th. January 20th is a Saturday in the month of January. On January 21st, we will have a members meeting. There will be any last discussion there. There'll be a vote. That'll be a meeting that every single person, if you're a member of Gallup Hill Baptist Church, you need to be here for that meeting. We will have childcare. We will have snacks and all that kind of stuff. We will take care of it, okay? Plan on being here. If you've got other stuff going on, this is your pastor saying, please reschedule, right? You need to be here for that particular meeting. You need to be here for all the meetings, but for that one. Okay, now, I want to introduce them. I've asked them to come up today and to really spend a few moments and share their testimonies with you. And then I asked them to go through and address, what opportunities might they see for the church? What challenges might they see for the church? To talk a little bit about their calling to serve. So we're going to take it just in order of last name. So first up is going to be Mr. Lewis Bankson. Invite Lou up. Forgot Lou's got his own microphone. I can get out of here.
I do. Lights on. Everybody can hear me, hopefully, maybe. I can hear me, so I'm guessing you probably can too. Good morning. My name is... Ooh, that sounded a little ringy. My name is Lewis Bankson, for those of you who may not know me. I have been here at Gallup Hill Baptist Church for a number of years. Numbers, despite being my job as a math teacher, those kinds of things, like that fine details, tend to elude me. So, good grief, how long now? I'm getting 8 and a half, something like that. So we've been here for a good little while. But yeah, I'm here today to share my testimony with you and talk a little bit about my calling that I feel God has called me to this position at this time as an elder here at Gallup Hill Baptist Church. All right, pull up all my stuff. So God has been working in my life for my salvation, out of his love for me, since before I was born. And I can see that and point to that kind of explicitly. My mom and my dad, though both had backgrounds in the church, were not attending church before my siblings and I were born. But when my older sister, 2 years older than me, when she was expected, it was my mom with us today who felt determined, felt convicted that she wanted us to be raised in the church. She wanted us to be raised knowing God. So out of that, when I was born 2 years later, I had the blessing of being raised in the church, of hearing the message of Jesus Christ preached since I was too young to understand the English language all of my life. That said, in my early childhood, it was a thing that happened on Sundays, and I knew the stories. I went to Sunday school, VBS, sat in church, and I knew about Noah and the ark, and I knew about Daniel, and I knew about David, and I knew about Jesus, but it was something we did on Sunday, and I was very, very passionately waiting for that Saturday morning when those cartoons were going to come on, right? When I was a little kid, that was the important thing for me, and church and God was something that happened on Sunday. And that was my young life, right? I knew who God was, I knew the stories, but it hadn't really reached deep into my heart. And that changed for me in my early preteen years when my parents divorced. So when we were going through this process, I was kind of struck with a sudden realization. So I have an older sister, 2 years older than me, and a younger brother, 5 years younger. So he was about 6 or so. When my parents divorced, my dad moved out of the house, and I kind of had this realization at around 12 years old that I was man of the house now. That I was, the oldest male in the house, and that there were certain responsibilities that kind of now fell upon me. There were things, I remember a particular moment when the doorknob to the door that connected our living room to the garage broke, and it wasn't working. And I had this, without any training or something, it's like, this is my job. This is what I need to do, to get in there with a screwdriver and take this thing apart and figure out what's actually happened and make this doorknob work again. So I had this kind of feeling like I am man of the house. I am responsible in certain ways, in ways that I hadn't been up until that point in time, which I was okay with, kind of taking that responsibility, until I realized something. It was when I was looking at my younger brother, right, about 6 years old. And I had this realization that from his perspective, right, and already, he looked up to me, right, idolized me in a certain way. I didn't appreciate it at the time when he was copying literally everything that I would say and do, but that's what it was, right? Mimicry is the sincerest form of flattery. You don't appreciate that as a 12-year-old, but I understand it a little bit better now. I kind of had this realization that I was his male role model now, that he was going to be looking at me for how he was supposed to be, right, as a young boy and as an older kid, and then as a man, right? That I was his role model. I was what he had to look up to, and that, to me, at around 12 years old, was just this crushing burden. This realization that I had no idea how to act and how to behave, and I had no idea where am I supposed to look? How am I supposed to guide my younger brother? I didn't want to let him down. I was terrified of letting him down. And so that was this weight that was upon me for a long time, and that was how God was able to reach out to me in a deeper way. When I had this moment of realization one morning that I had been living in the light of a perfect male role model my entire life. That I did not have to feel overwhelmed and crushed and afraid by that burden, because I had a perfect guide who was constantly demonstrating perfect love for me and instruction on how I was supposed to behave. So I was about 12 years old or so when, despite having known who God was my entire life, despite knowing who Jesus was, I properly appreciated and understood that, and literally fell down onto my knees and prayed in complete desperation, right, for God to forgive me. That through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that my sins would be forgiven, that God could be my God, my Father, so that I would be prepared to be the man I needed to be from that moment forward. And then from there, moving forward, God had just continued to demonstrate his trustworthiness, his faithfulness, and his deep and abiding love for me, and his perfect plan for my life. As far back as I can remember, I had no idea what I wanted to do as a vocation, what I wanted my job to be, but I knew from a very, very long time I wanted to be a husband and I wanted to be a father. That was the job I wanted more than anything else. I picked out my daughter's name. I picked out Lily's name when I was, I think, around 11 years old. I kind of caught onto that name and I just loved it. And I was like, weird little 11-year-old kid who's like, one day I'm going to have a daughter. I want her name to be Lily. Not a whole lot of 11-year-olds, are picking out baby names, but I was. And I was blessed with that. So through my teenage years, through youth group, through church opportunities, God continued to build me up through time spent in the Bible, through time spent in prayer. God continued to work on me, to help me to grow, to know him better through his son, Jesus Christ. And God was faithful in his promises that he wants good things for his children. I know I didn't know it at the time. When I was 16 years old, God introduced me to Kate, who would eventually be my wife. And from that point in time, we've been together since I was 17, so just about half my life now, God has worked through Kate, right, as a helper for me, helping me to become, right, a better person, a better man, a better husband, a better father. It was, Kate through whom God led me into like my first proper ministry, right? Started working in youth group, started getting me like that, that itch to teach. And through Kate as well, that God blessed me with, the family, right? The wife and the children that I had desired since I was just a teeny tiny little kid. And God's faithfulness shone through that as well in ways like I never could have imagined. When Kate and I were young, we had a plan for, raising our family, for the timing of it. We thought we had it down. God said, no, your timing is not my timing. We had thought 2 kids, wait a little while, couple years, 2 kids, and God said, no, you're going to have 4. We're going to cram them all nice and tight together. And there was definitely a time when that was like, God, what are you doing? Why would you do that to us? Have that many little kids? And it wasn't until later, and kind of reflecting back, we realized that my cancer diagnosis, the surgeries that I undertook, the chemotherapy that I undertook meant that if we had stuck to our plan and our timeline, we would not have the children that we have today. Right? God was working through something painful and something bad to give us joy and to give us life. That is what God does for us. Oh, God has just been perpetually good and faithful to me throughout all of this. And through that, God has called me into service. So the second thing I kind of want to talk about is my calling, right, for this position, for this role of elder, and kind of the realization that God has been working in me over many, many years to show me that, like, right, as Pastor Kyle shared with us, right, pastor, elder, overseer, teacher, right, these words are used interchangeably in the Bible, and that is what God is calling me to do, is to teach and to share His wisdom and His love, and to let me just be a tool for Him in that way. I was brought into youth ministry early on. Right, Kate was attending a church in New Haven, Connecticut, while I was still off down in Orlando, Florida. And then when I came up, Kate had already been involved in the youth ministry, and so as we were getting ready to get married, it seemed like a great place to step in and be active in this church family. And then that is something that we've kind of carried forward as we came here to Gallup Hill. To kind of build youth group up, right, from the ground up, to just create these wonderful relationships and to share God's love with young people, which is something we've felt passionate about. God led me from, my first job. As I mentioned before, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So, hey, if you're in high school and you're in that same position, even in college, right, it's okay. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I got my first degree. I got my first job. I worked for 10 years at Electric Boat. But I had this kind of nagging in the back of my head, right, that I wanted to teach, and that's where God has led me there as well, now teaching out in Plainfield High School. But with regard to the position of elder in particular, I can also see, God's work in that way as well, and kind of guiding me toward that. When we were at church in New Haven, there was a work to plant a church over here. We had a whole bunch of people going to that church, driving an hour down from New London, who decided like we wanted to kind of work on planting a church in New London, not have that crazy commute for everybody. So Kate and I were part of that. This was now about 10 years ago, 10 years ago, in the early days. And it's strange to think that at 24, but by then being a husband and a very new father, I was basically the elder in the literal sense of that group, right, of a bunch of 21, 22-year-olds. So as they were talking about building this church up, they were talking about that position of elder, and finding people. And I was just completely freaked out. I'm like, I'm 24 years old. I've only been married a couple of years. I've got a baby. I'm a baby, right? Like, how could I possibly be that? I had that, that kind of nagging sensation, like, how can I possibly be an elder at 24 years old? And that's something that's kind of stuck with me for a long time, is that kind of like, when am I ready? When am I old enough? And what God led me to was from 1 Timothy. So as Paul is writing to Timothy and talking about the qualifications of elder, in 1 Timothy 4:12, Paul wrote, "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. And the realization that it's that example, not my age, right? My age isn't really a factor, right? If God chooses to work through me in this position, he will work through me in this position, whether I'm 34, 44, 84, whatever the case may be. At the same time, God has been speaking to me as I'm spending time in my Bible. I was called to the book of James, and I didn't know why, and I think maybe now I have an idea. I was reading through the book of James, and I had this kind of realization that in these 5 chapters, there is so much there. And it was Pastor Kyle's work in preaching through the book of Matthew and realizing as he's taking these tiny little segments of the book of Matthew and sharing with us so much, right, that it's stretched out across this year, that, God's word has so much deep content. There's so much that he has to share with us. So I've been very slowly picking my way through the book of James, right? It's not a very long book. But when I reached chapter 3, verse 1, James wrote, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness," which may not seem like something that speaks to like, hey, yeah, you should definitely become an elder, right? That's clearly, what James is trying to say. Not many of you should become teachers, right? You who teach will be judged with greater strictness. And that maybe would have scared me away if it weren't for the fact that I was also reading through Proverbs and at the time, and so these kind of fell into my lap at the same time. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12, which says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof, for the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights." And I had this realization that yes, if you as the congregation of Gallup Hill Baptist Church decide to appoint me as an elder, yes, I will be judged with greater strictness, right? As that position as a teacher, it is the expectation that I model through my words and my actions and my thoughts and behaviors, and that there is kind of a greater weight to that in a certain way, right? I will be judged with greater strictness, but at the same time, that is not something that I should be afraid of. That should not scare me away from this position, right? I came to know God because he is the Father that I desperately sought after and needed. And God reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights, right? And so in realizing that God is my Father, that God has adopted me as a co-heir with Christ, that he loves and delights in me, I should not be afraid of that greater strictness. I should not be afraid of the Lord's reproof. Rather, that is what he is calling me to do. So, thank you so much for your time. I got to turn this over before I probably keep going, but I will stop before somebody starts throwing things at me. Or I've been told Aaron has the capability to mute me if he ever needs to. So, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Lou. Yes. They've each got 2 belt microphones on, but they operate off the same channel. So if Aaron turns his on before Lou's done, Lou turns off. So it's like, if you really don't like what the other person's saying, you just mute them from your seat, right? Yeah, so anyway, all right. So next up is Mr. Aaron Cassavant.
Okay, ready to go?
Ready to go.
Lewis, I just asked you to use your power wisely. Hey, good morning. As you know, Pastor Kyle asked us to come share our stories with you, which I'm happy to do. Many of you over the past 4 years that my family has been here have heard certain components of this, but I'll try and put it into a coherent whole for those of you who may not have. At the outset, I would say my testimony is, and testimony just means it comes from a Latin word which means witness, right? So testimony, you provide testimony in court, you provide a religious testimony. It's essentially, I'm telling you, I'm recounting what I myself have experienced so you can evaluate the truth of what's being asserted. So my testimony is one of God's faithfulness to me and my family. As I've gotten older, I'm 42 now, I increasingly see his provision and mercy every day. I have a wonderful life, and I am profoundly thankful for everything he does and continues to do for me. A little bit about me. I was born to 2 parents, Richard and Jesse, who recognized the need to train me and my younger brother, he's 2 years younger, in matters of faith and righteousness. So I was baptized into the Roman Catholic Church at birth. I received my first communion at age 6, and I attended St. Gertrude's Elementary School in Chicago, Illinois. I still remember the uniform, dark blue pants, light blue shirt, a blazer or vest, right? Catholic schools are nothing if not good for snappy uniforms, until I was in the 4th grade when my dad took a new position out in Denver, Colorado. And we moved out west, and at the same time as the move, my parents left the Roman Catholic Church. And Cassavant family legend has it that my grandparents, who were staunch Catholics themselves, put the math together and realized a couple of things. First, Rich and Jesse are moving out west. Second, they're leaving the church. Equals, they're joining a cult. And so, again, the legend is that they offered to adopt my younger brother and I to spare us from a Jim Jones-like demise. But in any event, we made it out to Denver, Colorado, and joined a Pentecostal church. And as you can imagine, the transition from Roman Catholic Mass to Pentecostal worship was startling. And this is because this Pentecostal church believed in all of the things that you associate in your mind with a Pentecostal church. Anointing with oil, supernatural healing, speaking in tongues. And so I'm 8, my younger brother is 6, and we are being deafened by the sound of Pastor Rex thundering from the pulpit, prompting him to look over and be like, why is he so angry? Right? Because he had so much volume. And it was clear, however, while we were there, that Pastor Rex and his wife and his family, they're originally from Arkansas, but they loved Jesus. They wanted other people to love Jesus too. And I think that's what my parents were looking for in the transition from the Roman Catholic faith to Pentecostal, was a relationship with Jesus Christ. And it was at that point that we saw what church could be like an Acts church, like breaking bread together, bearing each other's burdens, praying for one another, being involved in each other's lives, helping with projects at another person's house. We learned what church looked like, and it was different than the Roman Catholic Church, and I think that's what my parents were seeking. They were seeking life, and that's where they found it. So after a few years, Pastor Rex and his family, they moved back to Arkansas, and so we settled at a local church in our neighborhood. It was Foothills Fellowship Baptist Church. It was a conservative Baptist church, and that's where I was saved. At age 10, I attended youth group, and I helped with Vacation Bible School. I taught Awana. I played the tenor saxophone in the praise band. Ezra, I can't even do an embouchure anymore, so no ideas. I can't do it for you. All right. Yeah, all right, sounds good. And I graduated from high school in 1999 and left to go to the Coast Guard Academy just down the road here in New London. During these first 4 years, the time that I was away from home for any appreciable length of time, my parents separated. They eventually divorced. My mother remained in Colorado. My father moved to Canada with his new wife. Talk about a clean slate there. And that was difficult for me because we were believers, right? We went to church together, and it was the first time that I realized that just because you profess faith in Christ, just because you're a Christian, doesn't mean that you're immune from life's trials. A lesson that I was to learn repeatedly over the next couple of decades. And like many college students, I didn't consistently pursue my faith in college, but I do believe that my faith exercised a preservative function and kept me from the worst excesses of the drinking and hookup culture that characterized college campuses in the early 2000s. Had many wonderful friends at the Coast Guard Academy. They were Christians too, so we held each other accountable as much as perhaps 18 and 19-year-old young men can do. We prayed for each other. I met my wife there. We're classmates at the academy. I was listening, actually this is a story, the Coast Guard cutter operates a big training ship, the Eagle. You may have seen it docked at Trumbull State Pier. And I was doing the dishes in the scullery, and they had a CD player. You guys remember what those are? So I had a CD player, and we were able to bring our own CDs. So I brought my CD sleeve. Remember those? Those are the ones where you'd page through the books of CDs to evaluate if this person, you wanted to hang out with them. Because you're like, if you saw Sandy, Patty, and Petra, you're like, maybe I won't ride in your car to youth group. But in any event, I had put on Jars of Clay, which is one of the first and still the best, I see you in the back, contemporary Christian music group. And Candace brought her plate by to drop it off so I could do the dishes. And she's like, hey, it's a pretty cool band. I was like, yes, it is. And then she walked away, and I was like, all right. So in any event, we didn't start dating at the academy until our senior year, but again, God in his providence, she was stationed in Key West, I was stationed in Miami Beach. We were casually dating at the time, and I guess we sort of decided that we didn't really have to break up, and so we didn't. And we got engaged halfway through our first tours and transferred to Louisiana in the summer of 2005. We got married on July 2nd, 2005. After this, we started to take our faith more seriously. In other words, you start building a life together and you realize that you want to build it on something. And so we needed to get serious about our faith. But like many type A officer, military personnel, my priority was still very much having a successful career. But this changed. God was gracious with me through this time as he started to introduce the category of what he wanted from my life as opposed to what I wanted from my life. And so this was, again, the first time that I really let my faith influence a major decision. I had gotten accepted to the Coast Guard's funded legal program, which just meant that they would pay for law school so that I would come back and practice law for them. And so I had the choice of where to go to law school. And I don't know if you're familiar with the U.S. News and World Report ranking. Every year it comes out and they sort of look at the 200 or so odd law schools in the country and they rank them from 1 to 200. And in general, you want to go to near the top, right? Because that means better earning potential, higher billable hours when you graduate, better clerkships. And so the law school that I ended up going to was Regent University. And you have to go through a few pages before you get to where Regent University is ranked. So for law schools, rank is everything. But when I went to visit the campus, Regent's mission, and some of you may recognize the name Regent, it was founded by Pat Robertson. And Pat Robertson's mission for his law school was to teach the law from a Christian perspective and encourage its students towards legal maturity in Jesus Christ. So that's interesting. That's not what Harvard's mission for its law school is. That's not Columbia's mission for its law school. The closest one that gets there is Liberty University, which was founded by Jerry Falwell, right? But they were explicit in what their goal was, which was to teach the law from a Christian perspective. So when I met the teachers and met the students and met the professors, I was profoundly affected by the fact that each one of them felt called to study and practice law from a Christian perspective. In other words, it was the first time that I'd been introduced to a category of individual who was serious about letting their faith influence what they did on a day-to-day basis, which is awesome, because that's not what you generally encounter, say, in a military service, right, which is up and what's next and what's the next best job I can get. So God introduced this category of analysis that said, what do I want? What's best for you? And so I didn't quite hear the voice of God, but sometimes you just know. And so I ended up going to Regent University, ranked at that time 125th out of 180. And I started law school in August of 2007. While I was in law school, Calvin and Liza were both born April 2008, July 2009. And as far as I was concerned, things were going exactly right. I was a successful officer in the Coast Guard. I was married to another successful officer in the Coast Guard. We had 2 beautiful kids. We were growing closer to God and each other. We were active in our local church. At that time, it was West Haven Baptist Church in Portsmouth, Virginia. And then when Liza was 3 months old, in October of 2009, she had her first seizure. And it was 20 minutes long. Then she had another one, and another one, and another one. And before the year was out, she'd been diagnosed with Dravet syndrome, which, is a pediatric genetic epilepsy that catastrophically affects all the systems in the body. Okay, so now you have this category of terrible thing, and I've been used to getting good things from God. And so I was confused. I didn't know what he was doing. But like Lewis said, God was working even terrible things for our good. You look at the promise in Romans 8:28, and I don't have it. Well, I'll go there now to buy myself some time so we don't have to embarrass each other with you watching me cry. I'm sorry. But Romans 8:28 says what? It says what? And we'll go there together. It says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. So stay with me, because I didn't realize what the good was yet. But in his providence and in his mercy, he had introduced a new category of analysis, and that was painful things that will result in maturity and growth. And so one of the reasons God brought me to Regent University was because it was a Christian, it was filled with Christians. It was filled with believers. So the first time we got the news that Liza was sick, we set aside contracts and we turned to prayer. They don't do that at Columbia. They don't do that at Harvard. But they did it at Regent. And so in hindsight, I realized this was exactly the place I needed to be. And for the 12 or so years, we've been struggling to comprehend Liza's diagnosis, which is definitely not a good thing. A sick kid is definitely not a good thing. Disease is definitely not a good thing. But you serve a great God who can use not good things to bring about great things. And so I would encourage you, as you go through those circumstances in your life where you look up at God and you're furious, because that's not how it's supposed to be. He knows that's not how it's supposed to be. But in his providence and in wisdom and the foresight that he has that you don't, you can trust in his goodness, even when it doesn't feel like it's being good. And I learned that in my 30s. And I would give it all back if Liza was healthy. But that's not how the world works. And so that's part of what I bring here into my 40s, is that understanding. So after that profoundly transforming experience down in Tidewater, we got stationed in Washington, D.C. Life continued as it always does. We got stationed near Candace's family home in Northern Virginia, which, again, you look in hindsight, is a wonderful thing because we were close to family, especially, and we needed that support as Liza has struggled with her diagnosis, and we did too. We had 2 more kids. Again, testament to God's grace, right? Like the second one, things didn't work out the way you thought it to, but we, in faith, stepped out and had 3 and 4. We have 4 kids, Calvin, Liza, Summer, and Heidi, and so even in that, God's goodness shone through. I was assigned to several positions at Coast Guard headquarters, all good experience for me, and ultimately provided me with what I needed to get stationed up here in 2019 to be the staff judge advocate or primary legal counsel at the Coast Guard Academy, which is where we found you guys in August of 2019. And that's a funny story. Too, we were on a cross-country road trip, and we had made it all the way out to, I think, South Dakota, and we were sort of thinking through where do we want to go to church and what do we want to do, and there were some churches in southeastern Connecticut, but I distinctly remember at the end of July, it was the middle of the night, we were in the Badlands or something like that in State Park, and Candace is like, "Hey, wake up." And it's 2 a.m. and I'm groggy. She says, "I think I found our church." And it was like a slideshow of what you had done for VBS, and it looked like you guys worshiped in a gym. And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right, great, we'll check it out." And so we got up here and had the opportunity to come visit you. And we were like splitting up that Sunday morning, and that's the first time I heard Pastor Kyle preach. And I texted Candace and I said, "Drop whatever you're doing at that other church, get over here. This is where we're supposed to go to church," right? And so even there, I saw some providence as we identified Gallup Hill as the place that we were meant to be. And so I guess, again, go back to my topic sentence or my thesis statement of God's grace and providence. God has taught me over the last 20 years that life is not about what I thought was important, but rather what He teaches us really matters. It's not money. It's not how important I am, what I do with my career, my rank. Instead, it's cultivating a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, steadfast trust in God, despite the circumstances of your life when things are moving wildly around you and you don't understand what's going on or what He's doing or why He's bringing these circumstances into your life. You can rest solid in the foundation that God provides for you, that He does love you, and that He sent His Son to die for you, to make a way for you to be in right relationship with Him. Those are the things that are important. It's loving relationships with your family, with your husband, with your wife, with your children. It's working together with the people in this room to bring about the salvation of many people that have been brought into our spheres of influence, right? These are the things of eternal significance, and therefore the things that you ought to spend your limited time, energy, and effort on while you are here on this planet, on bringing about the bearing of much fruit. So I would encourage us to do them together, and that's the reason why I would like to be one of your elders. And on that note, let me talk about some of the opportunities that I see for us. Lewis talked about his calling. I will talk about opportunities that I see standing on the eve of 2024 for this little church here in Ledyard, Connecticut. The first opportunity that I see is no different than the opportunity that every church, every local church, not the global church, but every local church has had since the beginning of the church age when they watched Jesus ascend into heaven. And that is simply this. It's the command that Jesus left them in Matthew 28, which was to make disciples of all nations, teaching them to observe the things that Jesus has commanded. Yes, our first opportunity, and I encourage you to look at it as such, is to call the people within your spheres of influence to commit to Jesus as Savior and Lord. That is the single most important decision they will ever make. And it is our job, to whom God has entrusted the ministry of reconciliation, it is our job to introduce them to this new category, this new framework of the gospel. And before we can turn them into disciples, we have to share the gospel with them. So practically, I have one more point, but I just want to encourage you to look at the things that we're doing in church. Things like Cookies, Cocoa, and Carolers, things like Upward Basketball and American Heritage Girls and Trail Life down the road at Community Baptist Church. The Christmas Eve service is a wonderful service, probably our most heavily liturgical service, which is just simply something that we do based on tradition. And invite your friends. Invite your family members, invite your acquaintances, bring them along. As Pastor Kyle has said, Christianity is a come and see religion. Come and taste the goodness of God. Come and see the difference between the counterfeit that the world has on offer and the genuine article that we have here. Bring them, bring them, bring them so that they can hear. Bring them so they can hear, and we will work hard to make sure that the things we do together, again with our limited time, energy, and effort and resources, make it possible for you to evangelize. So we have the opportunity to make disciples. The second opportunity that we have to, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5, take every thought captive to obey Christ. Listen to the full passage. Paul writes, "For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ." As I mentioned in my statement of faith, and it's in the elder introduction package, I think that the culture is darkening. I think we are turning away from the truth of the gospel. I think we are embracing false doctrines and heresies and lies, and as a result, holding fast to the truth as revealed to us in the Bible is going to become increasingly important. So we have the opportunity, here's our opportunity to speak clearly to a culture that is deeply confused about every major issue that it confronts. Every one. What is a man? What is a woman? What is marriage? Why do we have families? What are children for? What do we do with our sexuality? What do we do with our money? What do we live for? Why are we here? And the world, enthralled to the latest fads and the ancient powers, has fundamentally different answers to these questions. You need only look at TikTok and CNN and YouTube to know what the answers are. A man is a problem, and masculinity is toxic. A woman is whatever she says she is. Marriage is a contract. It can be severed at will and at the convenience of both parties. Families are formed to satisfy the emotional needs of the parents. Children are accessories to a successful life. Sex is for pleasure. Have as much of it as you can. Money, that's what makes you happy. Get as much of it as you can at whatever cost. Live for yourself. And oh, by the way, we're here by accident, so you might as well enjoy it while you're here. Do the answers that I just read sound familiar? They should. You hear them reinforced on CNN, on Fox News, on the internet, on Instagram. They are hammered home because that's the best the world has to offer you. That's it. That's the sum total of man's wisdom. And I would submit to you that we have better thoughts. We have better answers. So here are our answers. A man, what is a man? Is a protector, a warrior, a king. A poet and a prophet. As St. Irenaeus said, the glory of God is a man fully alive. A woman is a caregiver, a nurturer, a queen, a household administrator, clothed with strength and dignity. To her has been given the privilege to bring new life, new image bearers of God into the world. Together, men and women are to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth, to subdue it, to rule wisely as God's regents until he returns again. Marriage is a sacred promise that mysteriously results in one flesh, and it has echoes of eternity because God's relationship with the church is highlighted in the marriage relationship. Families are the basic building block of civilization. It's the best way to raise your children in the faith and to transmit it to the next generation. Speaking of children, they are blessings. Blessed is the family who has many of them. Money, use it wisely. Carefully steward it to accomplish the things of God. Life is for glorifying Him. And by the way, you have a purpose that no one else does. You should pursue it with God-given passion because nobody else can do what you do. Fearfully and wonderfully made, specifically charged, divinely appointed to live here in Ledyard in 2023, to influence the world for His glory. Simply put, we have better thoughts. We are to take them captive to Christ, and they are better than the world's. And because they are grounded in the person and nature of Jesus Christ, the world wants nothing to do with them, and they will be opposed. But that is nonetheless our calling and our opportunity to explain the better thoughts to a world that is unmoored and unanchored because it has no fixed reference point. So I hope you're excited about those opportunities to make disciples and to take thoughts captive. I know I am, and if you give me the opportunity, I would love to be one of your elders. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up. As they're making their way back up, kind of a couple of thoughts here. I'm always struck. From time to time, we have people share their stories. And every time it happens, I always think we need to do this more. And with people that are not just going to be baptized or going to be, a deacon or deaconess or going to be an elder. Like you all have stories of how God has worked powerfully in your lives. We need to hear those. So I think that may be something that as we move into 2024, that we'll take a couple of Sundays throughout the year and give our people opportunities to share. Like, what's God doing in your life and how is God working in your life? Because you need to hear it. Like, we need to hear it more often, I think. All right, the worship team is going to lead us in a final worship and song. And then I'll come back up and close us out. Let's all stand.
Bethlehem Ephratah, you are small among the clans of Judah. One will come from you to be ruler over Israel for me. His origin is from antiquity, from eternity.
Spirit. free. Thine oath from Satan's tyranny, from death's of hell thy people save, and give them victory o'er the grave. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel.
All right, church, thank you for being with us today. Jen will be in the back if you'd like to ask some more questions about A Night to Shine. Thank you to both our elder candidates for coming and sharing God's work in their lives and their calling towards us. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord turn his countenance upon you and give you his peace. God bless. We'll see you next week. We do need to stack and move chairs.
Rejoice, rejoice.